Hey everyone, and welcome back to AP Art History Home Edition. Last week we covered Object by Merritt Oppenheim, which is our quintessential surrealist work. However, there's a whole branch of surrealism that is painting-based. Many surrealist painters push themselves through a variety of ways to discover and become closer to their subconscious. They did this through starvation, deprivation, drug use, and dreaming. I'm sure you know the name Salvador Dali, known for his work The Persistence of Memory. Dali pushed himself to hallucinations through what he called the paranoid critical method. This is the work of Rene Magritte, who created painted juxtapositions the way that Merritt Oppenheim created actual material juxtapositions. And this is the work of Spanish artist Joan Miró, who used hunger hallucinations as some bases for his paintings. Today we're going to discuss two Mexican artists, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. Frida was closely associated with the Surrealist movement and created paintings that most historians consider to be surreal. The Surrealist movement founder, André Breton, told her that she paints her dreams, to which Frida replied, "I have never painted my dreams. I've painted my own reality." So Frida traveled between Europe and Mexico, befriending the Parisian Surrealists. Her favorite, Marcel Duchamp, as mentioned in last week's video, Duchamp dabbled in all of the movements. So Frida stated that Duchamp was the only one who has his feet on the earth among the whole bunch of cuckoo, lunatic sons of you-know-whats of the Surrealists. So the Surrealists were a pretty odd group with all of their drug use, their starvation, their deprivations, their sleep deprivation, hallucinations, the whole thing. They were kind of out there. They were a very weird group. But we really cannot talk about Frida Kahlo without mentioning Diego Rivera, as their lives were closely intertwined. They were married not once, but twice, and they had profound impacts on each other's work. So some of what we discussed today is going to sound like a soap opera, because it was. So get ready. We'll start with the story of these two with a focus on Frida Kahlo. It's necessary to know Frida's life story to fully understand her work. Frida's story is one of pain and strength. From a young age, she was rarely healthy. At age 6, she was diagnosed with polio. She was removed from the other children for a very long time, and though she recovered, she walked with a limp from there on out. She lived at La Casa Azul, the Blue House, her childhood home that would be a mainstay throughout the rest of her life. She showed a curiosity for education that her father recognized, so he sent her to German school while her other sisters went to a convent school. Her father was fully German and her mother was fully Mexican, so Kahlo was a mix of Mexican and European descent. At German school, she became exposed to European philosophers, which made her interested in both sides of her family. Unfortunately, at the German school, she was also sexually abused. When she was 15, that was when she first saw the work of Diego Rivera, a Mexican artist who focused on murals and was 20 years her senior. This started an interest in art. However, also at 15, she was involved in a really terrible bus accident that would impact the rest of her life. So this bus accident left her with a shattered pelvis and a metal rod that completely impaled her through her womb. This was back in 1922. Those are grave injuries by today's standards. This was insane. It was only at the constant behest of a friend who was with her in the accident that they even took her to the hospital. The people on the scene were going to leave Frida Kahlo for dead. She spent a whole month in a full body cast, almost completely immobile. Think about that while we're complaining about our quarantine. At least we are not in full body casts. After that first month, she spent many more bedridden at home, but her parents eased the pain a little bit. They actually made for her a special easel that was set up above her bed with a mirror and a new set of paints. She turned inwards, painting self-portraits while reflecting on her experiences with death, pain, and loneliness throughout this time. 5 years later, roughly, she was well enough to leave her bedroom. However, she spent the rest of her life in severe pain from this specific accident. So shortly after she recovered, Frida joined the Mexican Communist Party. Through that, she met Diego Rivera, and they struck up a romantic relationship despite their age difference and Diego's past 2 marriages and his very public infidelities. They got married. Rivera's work, as we'll see later, was all about developing a national Mexican style of artwork. Throughout the time of their relationship, Frida became more in touch with her Mexican heritage as a result. They moved around the United States due to Rivera's public mural creations, and eventually moved back to Mexico after a few years. Their relationship at this time was very strained after several miscarriages and Rivera's cheating. Among other infidelities, Diego cheated on Frida with Frida's younger sister, Cristina, which must have been particularly painful. Frida also had to have 2 abortions due to the injury to her womb from that first accident. She also had an appendectomy, and she had several toes removed due to gangrene. Her story, like I said, it's one that involves a lot of pain, and both physical and emotional pain. Diego and Frida, they separated for a brief time, and Frida had her own extramarital affairs. She had an affair with a prominent Hungarian photographer, Nicholas Murray, and a Japanese sculptor, Isamu Noguchi. She remained fairly politically active in the Communist Party, and she even offered their house to exiled Russian communist leader Leon Trotsky. They had an affair too. Trotsky and Frida Kahlo had an affair. Actually, when Trotsky was assassinated in 1940, Frida Kahlo was held for 2 days on suspicion, as she also knew the murderer. Soap opera people, I wasn't kidding. The Americans became very enamored of Frida Kahlo's work. She spent some time traveling around the United States in the late 1930s, and this time it was without Diego Rivera. Her work, as we're going to see, and as you're seeing throughout this video, focused primarily on self-portraiture and her emotional and physical experiences. There are many paintings that reveal Kahlo's emotional state and reference the things that were happening to her around that time. Frida Kahlo's popularity and fame paved the way for all future female fine artists to put their emotional experiences on canvas too. So Kahlo exhibited some of her work in New York and Paris alongside the Surrealists, despite her insistence that she was not really a part of the movement. After returning to Mexico, her and Diego Rivera finally got divorced. However, less than a year later, they remarried pretty soon after Trotsky's assassination. Their relationship in the second marriage was much more independent, and both continued to carry on extramarital affairs. So many affairs. They moved back into the blue house, La Casa Azul, Kahlo's childhood home, surrounded by animals and nature. Her health began to deteriorate, and she was still in much pain. She was required to wear a supportive back cast, and she went through 28 different versions of a back cast, like leather ones, metal ones, all different kinds. She had surgeries to try to fix things, but they often did not help. By the time the 1950s came around, she could not sit or stand for long periods and was confined to a wheelchair or a bed. She even had her left leg amputated due to gangrene, and after finding out about another affair that Diego Rivera was having, she attempted suicide. She wrote in her diary, "They have given me centuries of torture, and at moments I almost lost my reason. I keep on wanting to kill myself. Diego is what keeps me from it, through my vain idea that he would miss me. But never in my life have I suffered more." She became increasingly ill and bedridden, suffering from pneumonia, yet she did not let that stop her from participating in political demonstrations with Diego. Kahlo died in 1954 at the young age of 47. Some biographers feel that her cause of death was likely suicide, although officially it's marked down as it being a pulmonary embolism. Rivera stated that the day Frida died was the most tragic of his life. He died 3 years later, but not after getting married to somebody else first. So let's take a look at the work by Kahlo on our list, The Two Fridas. This work was created during the period that Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo were separated in 1939. It is oil on canvas. Looking at the composition, we have 2 Frida Kahlos. As said before, we know she was fond of self-portraits. These two Kahlos are seated, and we can see their whole bodies, making it a little different from most of her portraits that are often 3/4 length and focused on the head. Our two Fridas here are wearing different clothing. They have their hearts exposed, and they are connected in two ways, one through the holding of hands, and two through the thin vein that connects the hearts. The Frida wearing white holds onto a small pair of forceps, attempting to clamp the vein, and the Frida in green and blue holds onto a tiny portrait of Diego Rivera. We just went through the story of Frida and Rivera, so we can make some assumptions about the meaning behind this work. It references personal and political meanings. Personally, it is representing an identity split during the separation with her then husband. Their relationship was stormy, to say the least, yet Rivera contributed a lot to Kahlo's life, partly including her connection to her Mexican heritage. Politically, this work represents the struggle many Mexicans faced post-colonialism. What does it mean to be Mexican? What is our heritage after it had been taken over by the colonists? And how do we create a personal cultural identity when our history is so weird and mixed up? For Kahlo, this impacts the personal meaning even more. She's half European, half German. Here we have a depiction of her two sides. On one, she's wearing a European-style lace dress, holding the forceps to stop the bleeding. On the right, she wears a traditional Tijuana dress and lightly holds on to the picture of Tiny Diego. This Tiny Diego kind of cracks me up a little bit. So is she facing a choice between these two identities? Can they coexist? The vein and blood shows a union between the two hearts showing that she's open, she's vulnerable at this time, and of course we know just how vulnerable after all of the physical and emotional suffering that she's been through. After the two Fridas, Kahlo actually aligned herself more with the Mexican common people over her European heritage. She wore various traditional modes of dress, embraced her facial hair, and her portraits after this also primarily show her wearing Mexican accessories. She made her choice. Frida Kahlo is an inspiration to so many because so many recognize the personal pain in her work and admire how she continued to create through all of it. People who have experienced accidents, miscarriages, abortions, illness, amputations, death, and infidelity look at her work and feel hope, knowing that their experiences are not isolated, that other people, like Frida, go through these traumatic times too. We have one more work to take a look at in this video, and it's by Kahlo's counterpart, Diego Rivera. You already know the basics about Rivera, you can probably tell what kind of man he was, but we haven't discussed his artistic intentions and creations yet, so we're going to take a look at some of those. Rivera traveled throughout his 20s, befriending Picasso and involving himself in the Parisian art scene. He lived in Paris for several years and traveled throughout Italy too, taking note of the many public Renaissance frescoes. He returned to Mexico with a goal, to develop a national Mexican style. Remember that all of Mexico's ancient identity, the Aztecs specifically, had been completely wiped by the imperialists. Mexico fought and won their independence in the early 1800s, but the damage to their understanding of cultural identity and heritage was kind of done. In a biography about Frida Kahlo, actually, there's a really interesting quote. The author is discussing Frida's understanding and awareness of the conflicts in Mexican heritage and states, "What was it to be a Mexican? Modern, yet pre-Columbian, young, yet old, anti-Catholic, yet Catholic, Western, yet New World, developing, yet underdeveloped, independent, yet colonized, mestizo, yet not Spanish nor Indian." Diego Rivera was also acutely aware of these dichotomies and consistently asked what kind of artwork defines Mexico. When he realized that there wasn't a national style for Mexico, he knew his purpose. He began a movement titled Mexican Muralism. He traveled around Mexico. He traveled throughout Mexico creating public murals that showcased Aztec history and pivotal moments throughout Mexico's history. Their work on our list is one of his murals. It's called Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Park. It was painted in 1947, so later on in his career, and it showcases over 400 400 years of figures from throughout Mexico's history. Rivera did not pick and choose the best from history. He embraced both the good and the bad, the heroes and the villains, giving people the full picture from Mexico's interesting past. We see mostly bright colors, even balloons, but there are more contentious issues depicted throughout. The lighting is dark on the left and the right, showing the conflicts of the past and future, yet the middle is full of light, possibly representing artificial light and showing the obliviousness of the middle class. Breaking it down, this is usually read from left to right. There are several small pyramids of figures across the composition. Atop each pyramid is a president. On the top of the left pyramid is Benito Juarez, who made many reforms that improved the life of Mexico's poor. And on the top of the right pyramid is Francisco Madero, who led the rebellion of 1910. Rivera specifically showcases the revolutionary in particular. The Mexican revolutionary is iconic the way that the cowboy is an icon of America. Across the lower bands of these pyramids are the lower classes of people who don't have a hand in politics but who are the ones impacted the most. Looking throughout, you might see some familiar faces in these pyramids. We have Sor Juana Inez de la Cruz hiding in there, and of course, Frida Kahlo and Diego are closer to the center. Kahlo stands behind a child-sized Rivera. This is our second child-sized Rivera. Tiny Riveras all throughout. She holds a yin-yang, which is likely a metaphor for their relationship, their turbulent relationship. And Rivera is child-sized because this is the park that he would most often visit as a child. In the very center is the Catrina figure. So the Catrina figure is one you've seen probably due to the Day of the Dead. The Catrina figure actually started out as a caricature. It was illustrator Jose Guadalupe Posada's way to mock the nouveau riche in Mexico. It's meant to mock the Mexican people who adopted European traditions because they felt shame over their Mexican heritage. This work has ties to both realism and surrealism, realism in its depiction of actual events, and surrealism in the way it portrays people from all different time periods and backgrounds together. Rivera, though, through this mural and many others, made Mexican history more accessible to the people and demonstrated pride in his heritage and the story of his country. He also started a revitalization of public artworks that will go on to inform some artists in the rest of our unit. So there you have it, the turbulent relationship and art of both Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, or email or post on Google Classroom. I'm here to help.